conversation with one roof. This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning. It's 5 o'clock. I'm Nivareti Manu. The Prime Minister's trip to Southeast Asia has been described as his biggest diplomatic test yet. Christopher Luxon's returned from Singapore, Thailand and the Philippines, where he met with all three leaders. Trade and Agriculture Minister Todd McClays also visited China. Democracy Project geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller says in the three joint statements there was quite an emphasis on the geopolitical side, on defence and the South China Sea.
With one roof, this is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning, it's 5:30. I'm Nivareti Manu. A geopolitical analyst says the government appears to have a focus on international diplomacy. Christopher Luxon's returned from Singapore, Thailand and the Philippines, where he met with all three leaders. Trade and Agriculture Minister Todd McClays also visited China. Democracy Project geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller says the visit shows New Zealand's continuing to move towards the United States' position on all things geopolitical.
Particularly the visit to the Philippines showed that the Philippines is a strong US ally and will be starting military exercises with the US this week.
Mike Hosking, Marcus Lush, Jason Pine. All the names you can trust. This is Newstalk ZB News.
It's 10 o'clock. I'm Malcolm Jordan. The Prime Minister's trip to Southeast Asia has been described as his biggest diplomatic test yet. Democracy Project geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller says while trade was the outward focus of Luxon's trip, geopolitics was never far from the surface.
There was quite an emphasis on the geopolitical side in these statements. On defence, on the South China Sea was apparent in all three statements.
Foreign Minister, as you've heard, is front of the United Nations General Assembly and, like pretty much everyone else, has called for a ceasefire in the Middle East and a two-state solution. He says the Security Council's failed in its responsibility to maintain international peace and security because the veto's been used 5 times to prevent the Council from acting decisively. International relations expert Geoffrey Miller is with us. Geoffrey, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
See, should we pay any attention? I mean, good on him for saying it, but I mean, Blinken spends his life on a plane shuttling back and forth and he's not achieved anything. Why would we expect Peters to make any difference at all?
Indeed, look, it was a good speech. It was a solid speech. It was largely restating New Zealand's position, but it's still good to have this on the record. And, he covered a lot of ground in quite a short amount of time, calling for the ceasefire, telling Israel not to go into Rafah, warning Iran not to get involved. And he called the situation an utter catastrophe in Gaza, and I don't think there's anyone who'd really disagree.
No.
But I don't think that it's really anything new. I think there was an opportunity lost there, Mike. He criticises the use of the veto in the UN Security Council, and he says it's been used 5 times. I don't disagree with that. Look, Russia and China used their veto once for one of the resolutions, but mainly it's been the United States. And there was no mention of the US at all in this speech. And I think, calling out your friends or, speaking truth to power, if you like, talking firmly about the United States probably would be our best card to play at this point. But he wasn't willing to play that. And remember, we're trying to align our foreign policy with the US in other ways. But remember, the US has huge leverage over Israel because that's where so much of the weaponry is coming from.
Yeah, exactly.
From the US.
Although, I mean, fundamentally is the veto rule is broken, the UN is broken, and the two-state solution's never going to happen. We can all sit around and go, wouldn't it be great to have a two-state solution? Wouldn't it be great to have the UN that actually works? None of it's happening and never has and it never will. Isn't that the cold, hard reality?
Look, I still think you have to try for these things. If you just wave a white flag and give up, yes, nothing will ever happen. I think there is a chance. Look, Winston Peters is an experienced foreign minister. He's done the job twice before. He does have quite a good contact book. I do think New Zealand could get involved in a small way in the nitty-gritty of peacemaking in the Middle East. It's a thankless task in many ways, but he would have to spend more time in the Middle East. He spent 24 hours in Cairo on the way to Europe and the US, where he's spending a full week in the US. I think he'd need to spend more time in the Middle East if he wanted to do that.
Don't we need to see more pressure on the Hamas group to release the hostages? I mean, there seems to be so much coverage day in, day out of all the poor people in Gaza, who are poor people, and it's a disaster. No one denies that. But, I mean, at the end of the day, Hamas started this. They grabbed a lot of people and they've still got them.
And that is very true. And Winston Peters starts out in a speech condemning Hamas. And we should not forget those 135 hostages who are still unaccounted for. Israel estimates around 100 are still probably alive, and they must be going through absolute hell there in Gaza, and we should not remember that's how this all started. So it is good that Winston Peters started off condemning Hamas and condemning the taking of the hostages.
Exactly. Jeffrey, nice to talk to you as always. Jeffrey Miller, international relations expert. Look.
This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning. It's 8:30. I'm Neva Manu. A potential opportunity lost for Winston Peters at the UN General Assembly. The Foreign Affairs Minister reiterated New Zealand's call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, as well as a two-state solution to the conflict. He also called out the UN Security Council for failing to act decisively due to some members' repeated use of the veto. But geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller told Mike Hosking he wasn't willing to talk firmly about the US repeated vetoes.
And remember, we're trying to align our foreign policy with the US in other ways. But remember, the US has huge leverage over Israel because that's where so much of the weaponry is coming from.
This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. I'm Neva Manu. Praise for Winston Peters starting his speech at the UN by condemning Hamas. The Foreign Affairs Minister used his speech at the General Assembly to reiterate New Zealand's call for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, as well as a two-state solution. He expressed grave concerns for any Israeli military offensive, but also called for Hamas to release the remaining hostages. Geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller told Mike Hosking around 134 hostages are still unaccounted for in Gaza.
Israel estimates around 100 are still probably alive, and they must be going through absolute hell there in Gaza, and we should not remember that's how this all started.
Meanwhile, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu says a date has been set for Israel to invade Rafah.